What is going on? It's Halsey with the Helicopter Podcast, and I am thrilled to be chatting once again today. I sometimes have to pinch myself because I feel so lucky in the fact that one of my jobs is to just talk about helicopters with helicopter people. And so I'm thrilled about that and extra excited for today's conversation. But before we get into it, of course, big shout out to MHM Publishing for creating the vertical HeliCASTS platform, the platform in which brings this podcast to you. So big shout out to them. And of course, big thanks to our sponsors who make it all possible. Incredible that we are here and doing what we're doing and hopefully inspiring you to either jump in a career of helicopters or just keep doing what you're doing. So today joining the podcast was a referral from a recent podcast I did with a guy named Colin. And he referred me to David. He said, you got to talk with David. So David, welcome to the podcast. I'm not even going to try your last name. It's becoming a common theme on my show. So if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself so I don't have to embarrass myself by trying your complicated German last name.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. It's exciting. So it's a real pleasure. My name is David Funderburk. So I'm used to that getting pictured on a regular basis. So
yeah, I feel your pain. I've said it before on the podcast. Schider, pretty easy last name, I think, but it's uncommon. Everyone else is Schneider. So a lot of people put N's in it, or N's, one N. They put one in as Schneider. And then the classic telemarketer for me is Halsey Schider. So what can you do? It's one of those things. But David, well, welcome to the podcast. I had the opportunity of chatting with you last week and had a good talk. Obviously, I know where you're at now. You're flying air medical, but getting to that point, it hasn't been quite a straight path. So if you wouldn't mind, let's just start kind of from the beginning. What got you inspired to even start flying helicopters? What were you doing before helicopters? And let's just see where the conversation goes.
Cool. Yeah. So I started flight school in actually August of 2012. So I just hit 12 years, I think last week. And before that, I've been working in the steel industry, where I grew up mostly. That was kind of either went off to college or, we're into farming already, and or you went out to the mills. There was 2 or 3 steel mills and some other manufacturing facilities all in the same kind of general area. So out of high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Didn't want to go to college. I could have, but just wasn't interested. And there was a part of me that really wanted to join the military, but wasn't really sure what branch and what I would do. And but a couple of years out of high school, I ended up going down the hole of trying to join the military. Tried to join the Navy actually, and I was going to pursue a career in special warfare. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. Maybe fortunately, but either way, it didn't work out. And growing up, I always knew I wanted to do something different, something challenging and not normal. I was never been normal or the kind of guy that does normal. So a friend of mine who was a mentor, he had owned a couple of helicopters and on several airplanes over the years, and I had the opportunity to fly with him a couple of times in his airplanes. After the whole Navy thing kind of fell through, we were talking one evening, and he just talked me into going to taking a intro flight lesson in helicopters.
That's dangerous.
Yeah.
That's hook, line, and sinker, man. Flight school's best weapon is the intro flight. How old were you? So this was just right out of high school?
No, this was 2 or 3 years out of high school. I was 21.
So still a younger person, kind of figuring out what you're trying to do. I talk a lot about on the show my experience of being kind of a younger person starting flight training. I'm curious to hear a little bit from you and your perspective, starting your training at a young age. What I found is actually a lot of my guests started training late, upper 20s, early 30s, or even beyond, and kind of helicopters as a second career. So I haven't talked to a ton of people that were kind of younger like me. What was that experience like for you as a young person? What were some of the challenges? What flight school did you pick, and kind of what were the decisions that helped lead you to making that decision?
Yeah. So I think that when you're that young, the biggest hurdle is going to be money, right? Like, and then that's probably the case for most people, regardless of age. But I think especially when you're 21, everybody knows that flight school is not cheap.
Money was no option for me, man. I just took out a student loan. I thought it was free money. I had no idea what I was doing, and man, was I wrong. Still regretting that decision a little bit, because still paying that off actually. So if you're young and silly like me and you're taking out a loan for flight school, remember you do have to repay it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's what kept me from doing the student loans, is just seeing the guys that were 2 or 3 years ahead of me, and the income that they were making versus the student loan payments, and I couldn't really figure out how I would have made it work. I avoided that for the most part. I mentioned started out working in the mills at 18, and so those first couple of years out of high school, I really didn't have many bills. I still lived at home, and for my age, I was making good money and put a lot of that back. And so I had a little nest egg to start out with. It only got me, through the first 30 hours or something like that, maybe. I started out, I did my intro flight and about my first 10 hours of flight training at Midwest Helicopters in Chesterfield at Spirit of St. Louis Airport, west side of St. Louis, which is where Air Evac is, does all their training now.
Yeah, that was convenient for you to end up back there. I mean, for me, heading off to Missouri was like going to the other side of the earth, it felt like.
Yeah.
And I actually really enjoyed that little area of O'Fallon, and that was a cool airport. I did my AEL training in the fall, and so I was there for recurrent in the fall as well. And man, it's a beautiful area in the fall. I think sometimes when you're from a place like Oregon that's pretty majestic and very beautiful, you kind of think that there's, places in the Midwest are probably ugly, but I was impressed with O'Fallon, and I really enjoyed flying out of that little airport actually.
Yeah, it's a nice little airport, and you're right. You get into that central St. Louis is eastern Missouri, but the eastern edge of kind of the Ozark Range begins right there west of St. Louis. So yeah, it's a pretty area. I did mine. I haven't done recurrent yet, but I did my new hire training, and will be recurrent in December. So it's not quite as pretty in that time of year.
Probably cold. Even in October when I was there, it was like, holy crap, the Midwest is freezing. But I had a good time. We'll talk more about that, obviously. I'm kind of curious. It's been some years since I went to NEO and did my training and been to St. Louis doing that. I kind of want to hear your experience and what that looked like. So you started with Midwest, and then you stopped going there. What happened with that?
A couple factors. I lived about 3 hours away from there at the time, maybe 3.5. I lived in southeastern Missouri, about as far southeast Missouri as you could get, kind of in that tri-state area where Mississippi or Tennessee and Arkansas and Missouri all meet right there on the Mississippi River. And I had a Border Patrol Tahoe at the time that got terrible gas mileage. So that was, I was actually spending more money on gas than I was flight training, I think. That was part of it. And then there was also a flight school about halfway between me and St. Louis area called Copters. The owner of Copters, Paul Salmon, you may have actually heard of him. He had a YouTube channel, did a lot of, information type videos and flight, instruction type stuff. This was long before that. But they had a billboard right there on the interstate and by the airport. And I just drove by one day. I was heading to St. Louis to do what was probably going to be my last flight up there. And it's like, I want to give these guys a call and see what they're about. And turned out they were cheaper. It was a lot closer.
Kind of a win-win deal. I think my buddy Graham went to Cape Copters. I could be wrong.
Graham.
Ritter?
Oh, yeah. I know Graham really well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he's at AEL, and he was actually, I met Graham at my NEO for AEL. He started at Air Evac, I think doing like the maintenance thing. He was a little lower on time, and then jumped over to the medical side. So yeah, I remember, I've heard the name Cape Copters. I don't know the owner and I'm not super familiar with the operation, but I do remember Graham, talking about going there and good experience that he had there.
Yeah. So I know Graham pretty well. We've actually flown together a few times back when he was tilting his hours. I was doing the same. You're right. He did the RMO first and kind of got his last, night hours or whatever he needed. And he's still with AEL. He's at AEL 80 now. I think he's been there the whole time. But anyway,
it's crazy. I don't know how many. I was trying to remember what year I started at AEL. I think I was there. I want to say like 18, and I didn't last long. It was 18, and then I made it through one recurrent, and then almost to another recurrent. Then I decided to bail out. So I think just under 2 years of time. I want to fast forward a little bit just because we're talking about it, but we'll end up we'll kind of sporadically jump around here, but it's fresh on my mind. So you just started with AEL not too long ago in December. What was that experience like? What was the NEO like? I'm just kind of curious if it was similar to my experience.
It was like being waterboarded with a fire hose. It's 3 weeks roughly, give or take, 2 or 3 days of, like the first week and a half is just death by PowerPoint, as they say. It's, 8 a.m. to roughly 6 p.m. In various, classrooms, covering everything involved in the aeromedical side of the helicopter industry. And it's a lot. Especially for someone that I had no time in the 206, no MZG time, no Part 135 experience. So it was like jumping into the deep end. It was a lot. But after that first week and a half, you go to the simulator stuff, and you start learning how to start the aircraft and all those things. And then the last 5 days or so is what they call flight phase. And that's where you do all the real flying. And again, it's still a lot because everything's condensed and they're trying to cram all these different phases of the key phases of aeromedical flying that they want you to do their way. They're trying to cram all those into 1.5 to 1 hour flights. But they're phenomenal at it too. I mean, everybody there was great. All the instructors and the teachers we had.
Who were some of the instructors that you flew with?
The two instructors I had were Nelson and an older guy. My night instructor, I really lucked out with my night instructor. His name was Anderson. Last name was Anderson. He'd been flying for like 65 years.
Is that Howard?
Yeah, Howard Anderson.
Yeah. He didn't rough you up too bad. He roughed me up pretty good.
He's particular. He's very particular, but I think in a good way. And I've had instructors like that in the past, and so maybe that prepared me a little bit. But he was definitely challenging. But phenomenal guy, knew a lot, and was really passionate. You could tell about passing down as much as he could to you for the short amount of time that they get to work with you.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, Howard was a nice guy and good instructor. But yeah, particular, I remember him yelling at me quite a bit from the instructor seat, and I'm like kind of okay with that. I'm kind of like, you yelling doesn't really help my situation at all. But him and I made it through, and it worked out fine. You know, I think it's, some people I think connect better with, different types of instructors and whatnot. And I'm kind of a person, I had a flight school experience too. I'll let him remain nameless, but a flight instructor, the super cool dude on the ground. And then the second we got in the cockpit, man, he would just be berating me the whole time. And I'm like, look, this doesn't work for me. I don't know if I was yelled at too much as a child or something, but like, I just shut down, right? When people like start, I sound like such a buttercup, but all in all, I did actually enjoy flying with Howard. I think it was kind of that first lesson. I was like, whoa, this is a different expectation than I was, thinking. And then we kind of hit our flow, and I got to do a lot of flying with him. Did a lot of the night flying with a guy named Jim, I think his name was, and I don't remember his last name, but he was just the nicest guy, and had a real Southern accent. Just enjoyed that time. And yeah, I'm telling you, man, that was an intensive course. I had 135 experience. I had 206 experience. But even going into it, it was just a lot of PowerPoint, learning a lot. The simulator for me, for whatever reason, I thought I was done. The first day I did the simulator, the first simulator day, it was horrible. I mean, it went just horrifically awful. I don't remember what the guy said, but I feel like he said like, something along the lines of like, have you flown a helicopter before? Because it was just so bad. And I think it was the SAS that was really throwing me off. And then I figured I was going to fail out. I'm like, man, I'm screwed. And then I kind of, was able to kind of pull it all together. And then the simulator became, not an issue at all. And the whole IIMC event that they do at the end for your sim training went really well. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a ton of work. I got lucky. I don't know about you, but I just really loved the people I was in class with. Graham, my buddy Jackie, Chris, and then a couple of the other guys who I don't really stay in touch with. But the other three, man, we became good buddies, and we're still friends to this day.
We know you love helicopters. That's why you're here. But are you ready to make it a career? Hillsboro Heli Academy has been making dreams of flying helicopters come true since 1980. Visit us at flyhaa.com and dream big.
I had a similar feeling when I first got there, not necessarily because of the simulator, although it was very different. The simulator is a great tool, but sometimes you hear some people talk about it and they act like it's just like flying and the real deal, and it doesn't feel like a real aircraft, and obviously you don't have the same feedback. I know a lot of people complain about getting sick in that thing. This is very different. It's super reactive. And I did make a couple buddies that I stay in touch with. I was actually texting with one of them the other day from Neo. So yeah, there was I had a larger class, I think. I think there was 15 or 16 guys.
Wow, that is big. I feel like we had like 6 or 7, maybe. I don't remember full, but 16 would be a lot. Fun fact, do you know what airport the simulator is programmed for?
I know it's up in Oregon somewhere, but I don't know. I've never paid attention to the identifier and looked it up. I'm guessing it's right in your backyard.
No, it's not quite. It's about 5 hours from me. It's in Newport, Oregon. All of Frasca is out of Newport. I don't know why. And we had a family cabin growing up there. And it's we don't own it anymore, but we still have access to it. So we actually go to Newport a couple of times a year. And I always thought it was kind of funny. In fact, it was like one of those things where I'm a home guy. I like being home. And so going far away and being gone for 3 weeks, when I was in the when I was in the simulator, I kind of felt like I was back at home, like a little piece of Oregon with me, which was cool. Talk to me about some of the struggles that you had in the flight training portion of AEL. What was it like getting into MVGs, and what did your check ride look like, and how'd you do? Obviously, you passed.
Yes. I've always stressed for check rides. I've never not passed one on the first try, but it's one of those things that I'm always just a complete mental wreck over. I'm kind of a perfectionist, so that's probably part of it. And there's also, you don't know the person you're doing the check ride with very well. You don't know how particular they're going to be, or, and if they're going to be asking a bunch of gotcha questions, or, Neo altogether was just really stressful. You're in a hotel for 3 weeks, and of course, all the classroom stuff, it's tiring. And but flight phase, I would say, was the best part for me, because it was part where I actually get in the aircraft and start flying, and kind of start building that comfort in the 206 and getting familiar with it. And the MVGs, man, those things are awesome. I think you gotta have 100 hours of nighttime to come to AEL. That's, unaided. I remember the first night flying with the MVGs and thinking, like, I cannot believe I spent all that time flying without them. I never want to fly without them again at night. And they're awesome. And obviously they have opened up some possibilities, and there's also some things you got to be aware of too. Again, Howard was my night pilot or night instructor, so he really focused on that a lot. Getting familiar with the MVGs and paying attention to the contrast, and just little tips and tricks to manage your approach speeds and things like that when you're coming into LZs. And I'm sure all the other guys do as well. But yeah, it was cool. Flight phase just overall went really well for me, I think. I did have a few moments where, I just got frustrated or whatever, and probably because I was tired and all that, but the check ride went pretty uneventful. My first auto rotation, I kind of, goofed it up a little bit. I overshot my spot. I think I'd done 6 autos in the 206 at that point. So, but
well, the hard part too is they do auto rotations at AEL, and I feel like I wish that they would. I don't know if they've changed it, but when I was there, they wouldn't roll off the throttle. And to me, I don't know, I just never felt like the intensity was there, if that makes sense. And I get why they do it. But the autos were kind of hard for me there. Not hard. They were fine. I had no issue on it, but they just didn't feel real because they weren't, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. They do roll the throttle off now.
Oh, they do?
Yeah. So with me, they roll the throttle off. I think now you have to be at the company for a year, and you got to get signed off to be able to do throttle manipulations. And so if I was to go, wanted to go do autos, that's something I would need to get one of the instructors to come down for. I'd have to probably go up to O'Fallon to do that. But they do roll the throttle off now. So you're right. It does make it feel a lot more real than just lowering the collective and, going through the motions.
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm happy to hear that. One of the things, that resonates with me is because I'm a bit of a stress ball during check rides as well. I think anyone listening to the podcast, I think it's just a pilot thing, right? It's our career. There's literally money on the line. And so we want to pass, we want to do good. And I remember feeling fairly stressed out, during the AEL stuff, just because I really wanted to pass, and it was going well. I really had no indication to think that it wouldn't go well. And something that I've tried to kind of convince myself, and whether this is just my way of getting through the stressful time, is that if you go to a place like AEL or anywhere, insert any company, and you're new and you're going to training, I think if you show up with a positive attitude, a willingness to learn, and just a person that, is enjoyable to be around, I think that everyone within the organization wants you to be successful. I don't think anyone wants you to fail, and I don't, at least in my experiences, not just with AEL, but all the different operators that I've been with, it always get the sense that, man, I showed up, I was nice, I was polite, I was open to their technique, right? Maverick Helicopters flies wildly different approaches than Air Evac because it's two different missions, right? So we have two different ways of doing things. I knew that you flew tours. You probably flew the 66 differently than you fly the AEL 206. It doesn't make it wrong or right. It's just a different mission, different profile. And so I think it's the guys and gals that come in with a chip on their shoulder, an unwillingness to learn, lack of better term, they're a bit of an ass. I think that those people struggle, and maybe that's when the examiner might open up the door to the gotcha questions or whatever like that. But, I just have always tried to convince myself, like, hey, man, if I do the right stuff here, these guys want me to work here. And, I'm guessing that you probably showed up and were very polite and open to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, in NEO, they told us multiple times that they wanted us to pass, that we were not going to be put up for a check ride if we were not ready for it. If we needed a little bit of extra training, they were willing to invest that time and even money to do that. Obviously there comes a point to where, I don't know at what point they would kind of cut you off, but they made it very clear that they wanted us to pass and that, we were not going to go up for our check ride until they knew we were ready. And again, if somebody needed extra training, they were willing to do at least some of that, to get them there. I'm not aware of anyone in my class that needed extra training, but they were very clear about that from fairly early on in the so that was very reassuring.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no, AEL is a good company. I really enjoyed NEO. It's a great operation. They know their stuff. Air Evac back in the day kind of had a bad reputation, and at least during my NEO, they talked a lot about that. They talked through a lot of the mistakes and the accidents and the incidents they had in the past, and everything that they have done as a company to invest in, modernizing the aircraft with the glass cockpit and autopilot and things like that. The training that they have, the continual sim training that you'll do in the field for your inadvertent. I think the sim is kind of silly too, but I think for inadvertent IMC training, it's such a great procedural tool. And I became a better VFR instrument pilot, if that makes any sense, when I worked at AEL, meaning I felt more comfortable than ever. If I were to accidentally punch into the clouds, I felt like AEL did a good job at preparing me to jump into the clouds. And, I think when I left Air Evac, they were, I don't know, they maybe had 6 to 10 IMC events a year that would happen. Typically, pilots making good decisions, operational control, not having the issue with the flight, and then just weather coming in really fast and kind of catching people. And there's never an incident. Everyone followed the steps that you learn at NEO and during your flight training, and you continue to learn while you're out in the field. And so, overall, man, I had a great experience there. My area director, I was actually texting him today about something. I haven't talked to him forever, but a guy named Mark Fisher, super dude, supported pilots, supported good decisions, always had your back. And that's what I love, about working for any company where management supports you in good decision making. That's a good helicopter company to me. So, it's cool to hear that you're at AEL. I greatly enjoyed my time. What was your first flight experience? Your first actual patient transport? Mine was kind of funny. I'll let you go first, but tell me about what it was, what you felt, what that moment was like.
Yeah. So I got to my base in middle December, and I actually didn't get my first patient flight until January 1st. I got the first patient flight of the year for our base. And I ended up with 2 that day. But the week or 2 leading into that were kind of crazy. Like I got toned a lot for different flights. It seemed like I got a bunch of scene flights that got canceled. We have what's called early activation now. So, the ground crews, they get a call for a car wreck or whatever, and it sounds bad. They'll call to get us going, and then they'll get there and like, oh, we don't need a helicopter, and they'll cancel us. And I had that happen, and I want to say like 6 or 8 times before I got my first flight. And so, and each time it seemed like I got a little farther in the process of getting started up and getting going. And so that was kind of nerve wracking because, it's your first like legitimate Part 135, or at least for me, it was my first like Part 135 flight too, to like, all the rules that you've been, studying and going over, and then it's, patient flight. I ended up with a transfer from my first one, and ended up going somewhere that like none of the other pilots at my base had ever been to. It wasn't that far away. It was, maybe a 45-minute flight. The base I started out at has a little bit longer flights, generally speaking. But it was just a simple transfer. I did go through some restricted airspace, to get there to the receiving facility, but that wasn't really new to me. I've actually flown in restricted stuff a lot, so it was pretty uneventful. I remember getting through, finishing the flight, getting back to base, and thinking, like, man, that was it. Like, at MEO, everything, like I said earlier, it's so condensed. You're trying to do all these different maneuvers in such a short amount of time that you start to believe it's like, man, this is going to be crazy. Like, but then you get out to the base and you start actually doing flights, and it's so much simpler and a lot easier, and the instructors told us that, but, and then I got another one, not long after that, another transfer. And so I ended up with 2. And matter of fact, my first 6 or 8 patient flights were all doubled. So it was, either didn't fly or I flew twice in a day for like the first hitch and a half, or maybe 2 hitches. And then finally I got like a normal, just 1 flight day or whatever.
Yeah, it's awesome. I started in Del Rio, so on the border in Texas there, deep South Texas. And, our typical runs were either picking up along the border, either at our hospital that we were based out of, or Eagle Pass, or Laredo sometimes, and then going to San Antonio. And so I did a flight with the base pilot supervisor to San Antonio. We landed at all the pads. I felt very prepared for San Antonio. Get a call. It's a scene call. And the base pilot supervisor is like, "You want it?" I'm like, "Sure." I'll take it. So I go in, I type the coordinates in, and we're going completely different direction from San Antonio. And my flight crew right away is like, "Hey, when we pick this lady up," I think she had a stroke in her car. When we pick her up, we got to go take her to the closest trauma center, or the closest best center for her, which was in San Angelo. So I was going to go to this place that I had never gone to. We picked the lady up. I'm calculating fuel. It's a very long leg. I'm feeling kind of stressed out. I have no communication with CINCOM because of coverage. And so I just relied on my training, and it was daytime. Ended up going to San Angelo, landed at kind of a keyhole pad, pretty tight, actually. A lot of construction happening around. And so that was my first experience, and it went well, and I had a good time. And then I think the rest of that hitch, I had multiple flights, and they were all at night, which I thought was funny because, AEL doesn't really have you working the night hitch for a couple weeks or a month or whatever it is. But literally, like, I had 1 day flight, and the rest of my flights were night, under goggles and getting that experience, scene calls, inter facilities. And so I think I flew like close to 14 plus hours or something in that first hitch. So I got really lucky because getting that exposure that quickly really helped me kind of feel comfortable and confident. But it is a pretty neat feeling, those first couple flights, like, oh man, I'm finally doing air medical. How cool.
Yeah. It was, it's neat. I still get that every now and then when we complete a flight. Obviously what we do helps people. So, it's definitely rewarding in that sense.
let's go back to just kind of your lead up to being where you're at now. Something I found interesting was obviously you've kind of been in and out of helicopters, for the past 12 years. Talk to me about that. Where you finished your training, where did you end up? Then kind of what transpired and what did your path look like? Because it hasn't been really an A to B. It's kind of been an A to C to F to then B.
Bell Training Academy proudly supports vertical HeliCASTS. Experience hands-on technical training with dedicated maintenance aircraft to keep your skills sharp and your Bell aircraft operating at peak performance. Register for a technical course by September 30th and get $100 to Bell's gift shop. Visit bell.co/training.
Yeah, so my path is extremely non-technical. Hardly, none of it was really planned. So I paid my way through flight school mostly. I did end up taking out a loan from a friend around the time when I started my instrument training, just a cash loan, no interest, no due date kind of thing. But it took me 4.5 years, even with that, it took me 4.5 or 5 years to get, all my ratings. And during that time, I worked at one of the mills. The company was, at the time, and it still may be, the largest steel producer in the United States. I was a contractor out there, operating a lot of heavy equipment and just doing all kinds of things. So once I got my CFI, the owner of Copters tried to get me to come to work for them immediately, doing flight instruction. I was kind of apprehensive about that, and I was like, let me get my feet wet first, and do some teaching on the side. I had a 4-day on, 4-day off, schedule, so I had enough time to come up for 2 or 3 days and fly. So I actually did that for a year. I worked straight nights at the mill, 12-hour shifts, 4 on, 4 off, and then 4 days off. Most of those 4 days off, I would go out there and fly and do flight instruction. So I did that, and then.
What made you apprehensive?
I never really taught anybody anything before, other than I'd done some firearms, training and stuff with people, but it's, I never really wanted to instruct. It was kind of just a means to an end, right? And I know a lot of guys that feel that way. It's I don't really want to instruct. It's for some people, that's just the only way to get the hours to get to that next step. And I tried to, find another way, and it just didn't work out. And so, that was really it.
What was, looking back at it though, I mean, I kind of felt the same way. I was apprehensive, but also excited. And I was kind of excited for the next chapter of teaching and getting paid to fly, opposing to paying to fly. Looking back, are you glad that you had that experience? I mean, I certainly am, because I just felt like you become a really good pilot as a flight instructor.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly believe that flight instruction is going to make you a better pilot. I think it's something that everybody should do at some point. I made a lot of great friends, some guys, some of my former students I'm still, friends with and talk to on a, somewhat regular basis. I still fly with, a couple of them every now and then. So, I made a lot of friends and connections, people in other industries that, so yeah, it was a lot of fun. I ended up enjoying it quite a bit. And it definitely makes you a better pilot. So
that's pretty busy though, 4 on, 4 off. I mean, is that kind of what led to your first departure? Was a bit of a burnout?
Yeah. So it got to the point to where, working straight nights and then switching to days immediately and then going back to nights and not really having any, downtime to make that transition. It got really tiring. And I just kind of got to a point where it's I need to do one or the other. So I set up the time to meet with Paul and kind of just tell him, it's like, hey, like, I know you want me to come work up here, and, you know, I'd like to talk to you about that. And before I could even kind of ask for what the deal that I kind of had structured in my mind that like I would need to make that transition possible, he offered me exactly what I was going to ask for. So I was like, well, okay, that's cool. So
wish you asked sooner.
Yeah. So that was about a year after I got my CFI. And so I turned in a notice at the mill and, found an apartment and moved up there. It's about an hour and 15 minutes from where I lived at the time. So I moved up to that town and started flying full time. And then when I wasn't flying, I was actually helping out in the hangar, with the TART owner was kind of in charge of the maintenance side. He's now a pilot at AEL. He was a mechanic for them for a long time, and he ended up being my boss when I went to my first base. Phenomenal guy. His name's Dean. And so when I wasn't flying, I would, work in the hangar with him and or the other mechanic they had at the time. And so got to do a lot of, working on the 44s and 66s and 22s and stuff that were coming in. I actually got to help do an entire overhaul on an aircraft. Matter of fact, that aircraft was the one that Colin ended up buying.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So that was also, for those younger pilots that may be listening, that's a great thing. If you get the opportunity to do something like that. I never wanted to be a mechanic. I'm not a mechanic, mechanically minded person really, but it was definitely worth doing that and definitely learned a lot. And it paid off down the road.
Yeah, I think that is cool. Because I don't come from a mechanical background. I knew nothing about actually mechanics, and I think through flight instruction, kind of forcing myself to learn, like, okay, I have to teach this stuff now, and I still don't quite get it. I was able to, pull it together, and now in my business that I do now as a sales guy for helicopters, I'm actually very familiar now, kind of more with the mechanics of helicopters and the mechanical side, I should say, the record side. But all that stuff was so, not in my orbit is probably the best way to say it for a lot of my career. And, I think that was a missed opportunity. Not that I missed any opportunity. I never had, I worked at a big flight school. There's no way that you could go in the hangar and help the mechanics. I mean, that was just did not happen. That wasn't part of being at that environment. And I think that's a cool thing of being at a little bit of a smaller school is you kind of have those opportunities. And I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you're getting into flying, if you have an opportunity, not to go and pursue your A&P necessarily, but to be able to help and assist, work through an annual, let alone an overhaul, but even just doing an annual or 100-hour changing oil, whatever it may be. I mean, that's just fantastic experience. Being able to, I think you become a better pilot if you start to kind of understand some of the mechanics of it. So that's really lucky that you did that. I'm sure that was, extremely good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it even paid off. When I went to my next job, we did all of our 50-hour oil changes in the field. Whatever random airport we happened to be at. And so it really came in handy, having already done, 100 oil changes on 44s, in the time leading up to that, I was familiar with it and comfortable doing that kind of thing. So
what was that next job?
So I was at Copters flight instructing for, I want to say it was around 8 months full time. And it was something like that. And a crew came through from Chesapeake Bay helicopters, and they were kind of just passing through, but, ended up being 100-hour. I don't remember how they found us and, how it all kind of came about. But anyway, they showed up and we did 100-hour for them, and they were there for a couple of days. And I kind of, ferried the crew back and forth from the hotel to the airport and, whatever, and got to know the pilot. He's also an AEL guy, or was. His name's Brad. He's from Oklahoma. This is before, obviously, he went to AEL. But yeah, so me and him hit it off, and we linked up on Facebook or whatever. And he had kind of told me, what the hiring process was like for them. And I was getting close on hours to where he thought, maybe I could get my foot in the door with them. And I think I was pushing around HSD 900 hours, something along those lines. And like a month after that, he texted me and was like, "Hey, you're going to get a phone call." I'd already applied and all that. And he's like, "Hey, you're going to get a phone call. We're hiring." And it was actually to replace him. He didn't tell me that at the time, but so they called me, had like a 15-minute phone interview, and then they got we hung up and they got the owner on and called me back, and they offered me the job. I think I was at 960 or something like that flight time, and I started literally like 3 days later. They flew me out. I had to cram a lot of like LMS modules in, to like a day, and Paul, and everybody at Copters, they made it clear, like, if something comes up, take it. And no hard feelings. Cool. They were leaving so quickly. But
I appreciate a flight school owner like that, because a lot of them get very sensitive about you leaving. It's like, well, you pay me $15 an hour. I gotta, and I don't know what Paul paid, obviously, but just going off.
He actually paid.
Did he? Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm happy to hear that. I know a lot of flight schools that don't pay well, and it's like they're so surprised, when you leave. And so it's cool that they were supportive. What were you doing at Chesapeake? What was that operation? What were you flying?
So I was in one of their 44. I think only 44 they had at the time, doing LIDAR mapping for power lines. And that particular aircraft spent probably 80% of the time in Texas. That there were a lot of times where we would just kind of end up going wherever. I had one hit. We got sent home early because we finished up the work they had for us, and it was going to be a week or two before they could get some more maps to fly. But, it was a 15-day rotation. And I flew in 17 states and like 80-something flight hours.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
For those who might not be familiar with LIDAR, what is LIDAR? Why do they use helicopters for it? I didn't know that you could actually do it from a 44. I had a big client that uses like the 206, 407. But yeah, what does that mission look like, and what is the purpose? What does that do?
So the LIDAR, I don't remember what it stands for exactly, but it's
something complicated.
Yeah, something complicated, way beyond my understanding. But it's lasers and cameras, and basically there's this laser device in the pod. In ours, it was mounted on the side of the aircraft. I think some of them now, like the newer ones, are nose mounted, but ours is mounted on the side. There was a big pod. It kind of looked like a luggage compartment. And it had two cameras in there and a laser system, and that shot, zillion lasers at the ground, and they just bounce back, and that creates a 3D model of the power lines or whatever you're flying above. And then the cameras, there was one that was aimed, forward, so many degrees, and there was one that was aimed slightly aft, and those would be taking photos every so many seconds, depending on how fast and how high you were. And it basically just creates a very detailed 3D image of the power line. And the power company can take that and just assess the total condition of the power line, the poles, the connections, the overgrowth in and around the poles and stuff like that, how far they're leaning. And they're geo mapped, or whatever you want to call it. They're very accurate. The maps are like, I want to say they told me it was accurate down to like 3 centimeters or something insane. Just crazy.
Yeah, the LIDAR is cool stuff. I have a client that they're into LIDAR, and I got to go to their headquarters a couple of years ago, and they did kind of a demo, and they were showing the the packet that would get sent to the utility company. And it was crazy. They could and their system was able to actually distinguish kind of the type of vegetation. Mm-hmm. And so it would actually then forecast the growth of that vegetation into the line. And The cool part for me is like, if I worked at a utility, had zero experience, I could literally just look at this and be like, oh, okay, well, looks like we need to send a team here and, cut back those trees. And, it's just so detailed and so incredible. And I think it sounds like it's fairly easy flying, but it's actually kind of complex flying. You have to stay fairly level. You have to kind of turn the helicopter weird. You have to be fairly accurate on your airspeeds. Was there a bit of a learning curve? Was that providing you some stress in the beginning?
I don't remember being really stressed. At that time, I had most of my flight time was in the 44, so I was already comfortable with that platform. It was definitely different. The way the pod was mounted on the aircraft, and to get the camera, the roll of the camera correct, you had to fly with a left crosswind, and you actually flew out trim a little bit. As far as the speeds and stuff, I think the window was like plus or minus 5 knots. I don't think it was that. When you're going that slow already, I mean, most of the time it was 40 knots, I think, was the target speed. So, it is very technical. And yeah, you got to be accurate. I think the altitude window, so all of our altitudes were above ground. And I think for the low level stuff, it kind of depended on the spec and what type of line we were flying. It generally was 300 feet ATL. And I think the window on that was you could be a little high, you could be like 350. That was kind of like the top, as your window. And then you couldn't be that much lower though. On the low end, I think like 270 or so was kind of like the limit. And so, when you're in West Texas, it's flat and there's nothing to look at or hit, or, it's easy flying. Every now and then they'd send us somewhere, where there's other parts of Texas where there's rolling hills, or you go to, Colorado or something like that. And it can get very challenging. Especially when you're if you're got a left quartering tailwind and you're having to descend down a gorge or whatever while you're following the line. That can be, obviously very dangerous too.
Yeah, it's a crazy environment, 40 knots, 300 feet. One of those environments that you hope not to have anything go wrong. I do know that my client does kind of the technology that they have on their aircraft now is allowing them to get higher and higher for line inspection, for LIDAR. And now they're also doing aerial methane detection, which I think they can go up to like 800 feet almost, which is pretty impressive. Obviously, low airspeed, higher altitude is always kind of a better option. So you're doing the LIDAR. When does the gap start? When do you kind of exit flying? Doesn't really matter what led to that, but you stop flying and then kind of what happened.
So I was with Chesapeake for like a year and 2 months or something like that. And about halfway through that was when I kind of started the process of going back to the steel industry. I had family that had left the area that I lived in at the time, and actually both sides of my family were no longer in Southeast Missouri, and my dad and them were up in actually kind of your neck of the woods, up in Washington, and then the other side of the family was down in Florida, and so I'd kind of been thinking about trying to find a way to get closer one way or another, and the steel company that I used to work for, the contractor, was opening up a mill down in Central Florida, and so the family down there was kind of involved with them, and I got burned out. Obviously the money, those first, when you're starting out in the helicopter industry, the money is not really great. And so that was part of it. The schedule being gone for 3 weeks at a time was kind of getting old. And I had that opportunity to go back to the steel industry, making a lot more money. And being home every night and better benefits and all that kind of stuff. And so I think it was summer of 2020 when I left Chesapeake and went back into the steel industry.
I mean, that's obviously a big decision to make, one that was probably with many emotions, because flying is to me such a labor of love and passion. But, obviously and I tell people this all the time, I'm trying to be known or disillusioned about the industry. It's a hard industry. You start off as a flight instructor. It sounds like you were compensated okay, but, most people getting compensated, 15 to $20 an hour. Yeah, guys like me have large student debt. You can't service the debt because you don't have any money. That racked me forever. I mean, I defaulted on my student loan for 12 months, and had a credit score of 480, I think, since that time. I'm proud to say that I've gotten that back up and we're all good to go. But, that was, I'm 21 years old, making no money and having to pay $800 a month just for the student loan. So that's hard. Then you get into a first job, like so you're flying at Chesapeake. Again, I can't imagine it's great pay. And you start to kind of think to yourself like, man, what am I doing? And so it just takes so long. And, if you're listening and you're thinking about getting into helicopters, it's cool. It's awesome. I love flying helicopters. They're amazing machines, but it's a hard industry. And I've always been kind of, honest about that. So what was that like for you leaving the industry, and ultimately, what kind of brought you back into flying?
This podcast is brought to you by HeliCASTS. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. HeliCASTS handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter is sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at HeliCASTS today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-HeliCASTS, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@helicopter.com. HeliCASTS. List it, sell it, done.
So leaving the industry wasn't really that big a deal for me. I didn't grow up dreaming of flying helicopters. It wasn't even on my radar till I was 21 and just went and took an intro ride. So I wouldn't say that I love it. As far as the flying, I really do enjoy it. It seems to be something that, I have a knack for, but, I knew I was going to be making a lot more money, and I had some debt that I wanted to take care of, and I was getting closer to family. So for me, it was really, it was an easy transition, honestly. Now it wouldn't stay that way for very long, unfortunately. That mill down there was a startup, and I ended up in a crane, a ladle crane, actually. Ladle cranes, for those who don't know, they fly the pots full of molten steel through the melt shop, and it can be a very stressful job, and it ended up being that way at that mill, especially during startup, because you have a lot of, it's a new mill, and you're going to have little issues you got to work through and all that. And then on top of that, I had some things in my personal life happen. Went through a really bad breakup, and she was actually kind of tied to my aviation career. So that kind of left me not even wanting to think about helicopters anymore. And ultimately, just got to the point where the steel mill, it was good. It was great money. And I love my teammates. You get really close to those guys. You're obviously working in a very dangerous and intense environment. And, because of the schedule, it's 4 on 4 off, and you end up, getting to a place to where you spend most of your free time outside of work. The only people that that have a similar schedule to you are coworkers. So you end up doing a lot with your teammates outside of work. Met some great guys, and I still stay in touch with some of them. And But I got to a place where I needed a break. I had to figure some things out in life and wasn't sure what was next. And I knew I couldn't keep doing that. And Florida was not really my kind of place. And so I ended up leaving the steel mill in 22, like spring of 2022. And at this time, I still had no intentions of getting back into aviation. Got back, actually moved to Arkansas, where I'm at now. And that's kind of right in that time is when I met Colin. And Colin is a big part of the reason why I'm back into aviation. He thought the helicopter, like y'all talked about in his podcast that y'all did. And so I'm the guy that went with him to the hangar, middle of nowhere, and looked over the aircraft. That aircraft, as I mentioned earlier, was an aircraft that I'd helped rebuild and had a lot of flight time in. And so,
yeah, that worked out. That worked out conveniently for Colin.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah,
Okay.
just in the interest of time too, just because we are kind of pushing a little close here. We talked a lot about AEL. It took up a lot of time, but I'm glad we did that. I know that Colin kind of reintroduced you to kind of the idea of getting back into helicopters. When was like your decision, and what was the precedence of like going kind of back full time into helicopters? Because I know that you kind of took some time off, you did some things at the mill again, and then you kind of just dove headfirst back into flying tours.
Yeah. So for me, I'm a spiritual person. I believe in God, and in my mind, I can only really equate it to just an act of God. Because even when Colin, kind of persuaded me to get that CFI renewed and helped him out, in my mind, that's all I was going to do. There was no intention of taking it any farther than that. And then, some time passed, while I was helping him out, and another friend of mine called me about an opportunity that he had, kind of put in front of him, and was wanting my perspective on it. And it was this really great opportunity flying tours down in Florida. And it sounded like the money was good, and it was flying 66s, getting turbine time. And he had like 300 and something hours. And it was kind of one of those just like lottery, kind of deals for someone with that amount of flight time. And I think he jokingly said something like, hey, this would be a really great way for you to, get back in the pilot seat. And I didn't even think about it. I kind of just blew it off. And he texted me like a day or two later and was like, hey, I did something and I told them about you, and now they want to talk to you too. And I had about 1,500 hours at this time. So, kind of past the point of really doing tours. But, we ended up going down there and interviewing, and I was looking for a reason not to do it. And it just, everything lined up, and it felt like the right decision, even though it wasn't really what I wanted. That's part of having a relationship with God, is sometimes you gotta, put your own desires to the side and take up your cross and carry it and do things you don't want to do. So he ended up going down there, and it ended up being great. Had a blast. Money was good. Flew a lot. We flew a crap ton. I mean, I did like 600 hours over the course of the summer. And it just went really well. And I still, though, to be honest, halfway through the summer, I kind of thought that I was going to go back to the steel industry again. I had somebody that was trying to get me to come back to another location and help them start up another one. And, I still just didn't really see, an avenue in the helicopter world that was like, hey, I want to go do that. And, that towards the end of the summer, that opportunity kind of went away unexpectedly. And then a good friend of mine, Dean, who was the part owner of Copters, and he called me one afternoon and was like, hey man, like, I know you're not really sure what's next, or if you're going to keep flying or whatever. He's like, man, I'd love to have you here. I just found out I got a guy leaving the base, here at Air Evac 3. And I'd said years ago that I didn't want to do medevac if I was going to. I had to start out working with Dean at Air Evac 3. That was an area I was familiar with, and I'd worked for Dean in the past, so I knew that we got along great. And so everything just lined up in this very just unexplainable way. And I spent about a week training about it, and it felt right. And so I made the jump, and I'm glad I did. It's been great. So I've been very fortunate.
It kind of seems like the steel industry has been like your siren song. It's kind of that urge to kind of keep going back. I'm sure the money's good. It's seems like it's kind of in your blood and in your DNA of where you grew up as well. So it's kind of interesting to kind of see that pull, and as we finish up here, your path has been indirect, and we kind of took a little bit of a quicker way of getting there. But talking to you, I understand that there's considerable time away from helicopters, and then coming back in, and you just kind of talking about you not necessarily being like the most passionate, helicopter guy, like someone like me that was just like, ever since a little kid wanted to do it. How do you feel now? Do you feel like you're where you want to be? Does that steel industry siren still ever blare its song?
Not really. I never enjoyed the steel mill work. It was always there for the money. It pays very well. And, so no, I don't miss that work. I don't want to go back, especially as I'm getting older. I'm 32. It's hard on the body. That schedule,
old man.
It's just, yeah.
32, man. I wish I was 32 again.
Yeah, but no, things are going really well at Air Evac. I'm enjoying it. I'm really starting to get acclimated, and I just transferred to a base that's a lot closer to home, and actually had a higher geo modifier, and so it came with the grays, and they have shorter flights generally than the base I was at before. So, it's, I don't know if there'll be another thing, another flying gig down the road, or if this is where I'm going to retire. I've never been like a careerist in the sense that like I've planned out that far ahead.
For the time being, you're happy where you're at.
Well, things are going well. I'm comfortable. I live somewhere where I enjoy living here where I'm at, and I'm able to do things that I enjoy in my free time. And Air Evac compensation has increased significantly in the last 2 or 3 years. So, financially, I'm able to have the quality of life that I want. And you mentioned earlier, working for Air Evac is everybody's very professional and very supportive and all that kind of thing. And that's still very much the case. They want to keep you happy and taken care of, and they do everything they can to, support you. And we have access to all kinds of, things for work as far as, flying and all that kind of stuff. They really make sure that we have everything we need and all training. So, I'm not looking for anything else. There's no plans to look for anything else. This is, I think I'll be here for a long time. Yeah,
that's awesome, man. I'm glad that you landed, no pun intended, in a place where you're happy to be. And, it's a great story. And if you're listening to the podcast and you're kind of like, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, kind of getting pulled in some different directions, whatnot, take some time. Obviously David here leaned on his faith. If you're not a person of faith, it's good to just get some space sometimes, some mental space, and kind of let the universe play out how it's going to play out. And, so I think that's an interesting you've had an interesting path, and it's cool where you're at. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's been a great conversation. To our listeners, just grateful for you and for you listening. To our sponsors, of course, just grateful for that as well, and to MHM Publishing and the entire Vertical HeliCAST family. It's awesome. We're just doing everything helicopter podcast related on one single platform. So if you haven't checked out Vertical HeliCAST, I really encourage you to do. Also, I have a new Instagram handle. It's Halsey. A little silly, but kind of works, right? So the helicopter podcast is still on Instagram as well, but Halsey is a page that I'm excited about because it's going to kind of encompass not just the podcast, but it encompasses what I'm doing on my helicopter sales brokerage at Helicopter. It encompasses me doing some cool flying stuff with clients and other friends, and of course the podcast and some other exciting stuff that I'm working on with MHM and Vertical Magazine. So please like and follow the Halsey page. David, thank you so much for joining. And good luck and keep rocking it at Air Evac.
Well, dude, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, buddy. See ya.
All right, have a good one.
We know you love helicopters. That's why you're here. But are you ready to make it a career? Hillsboro Heli Academy has been making dreams of flying helicopters come true since 1980. Visit us at flyhaa.com and dream big.
Bell Training Academy proudly supports Vertical HeliCASTS. Experience hands-on technical training with dedicated maintenance aircraft to keep your skills sharp and your Bell aircraft operating at peak performance. Register for a technical course by September 30th and get $100 to Bell's gift shop. Visit bell.co/training.
This podcast is brought to you by Helicopter. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. Helicopter handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter is sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at Helicopter today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-HELICOPTER, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@helicopter.com. Helicopter. List it, sell it, done.